speakers would be Dr. Petty, Dr. Humes, Dr. Boswell. You have those. I think anybody else who talks would identify themselves to you and to the doctors.
Okay. And the man who just spoke to you is Dr. Michael Baden from Boswell. And the only statement that I wish to make in advance is that Dr. Humes and Dr. Boswell have come here voluntarily, not by subpoena.
That should be recorded, right?
Yes. And simply because the other doctors thought there was some information that might be of assistance to them in their deliberations. We decided that because of the fact that it was the doctor's request that they come, and Dr. Humes and Boswell have come voluntarily, the staff will ask no questions, and you all just proceed as you see fit.
I'd like to comment that we're pleased to be here, and I, for one, welcome the investigation in the hope that it will ultimately, through all facets of it, erase doubts that exist in the public's mind, the mind of the Congress and others. Any help we can give, we're delighted to do so.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure that's not for the staff, but the doctors here, sentiments exactly too.
And if I could just, in the beginning, just thank Dr. Humes and Dr. Boswell for coming here, and for coming here at such short notice and helping us in our interpretations.
I'll use your name so it will come out right in the record rather than your first name. But Dr. Hume, all of us here are forensic pathologists, and we're all faced with the same problems you were faced with on the night of the autopsy. We know perfectly well what pressures you were under, and this is in no way critical of anything that was done. We're only interested in certain information which we hope you have stored up in your associated tracts and will be able to give us to help unravel some of the mystery and mystique that has surrounded this thing. First of all, now let me start with the question that was on the lips of everyone here. And that is, did you or didn't you look at the adrenals?
I would ask you, does that bear on your investigation of the event that took place that night?
No, all we were wondering was, we noticed that was noticeably absent from the autopsy report.
Since I don't think it bore directly on the death of the president, I prefer not to discuss it with you.
All right. Fine. If you prefer not to, that's fine with me. We were just curious because normally we examine adrenals in the general course of the autopsy as we undertake it. Okay.
I'd only comment further that I have strong personal reasons and certain other obligations that suggest to me that it might be preferable.
All right. Secondly, did you ever see a piece of bone which was picked up apparently at the site of the assassination, retained for some period of time, and then submitted to the FBI?
No. The only extra piece of bone brought to us than that was contained in the casket that brought the president to us was a piece of bone that was brought to us later on that evening, and the time, as you can imagine, I wouldn't wish to guess, but I would have guessed it was midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, Jay, something like that.
And there are x-rays of that.
Yes, we have x-rays of that. I think there are 3 fragments of bone, actually, yes, right. 1 large and 2 small.
Those were the only other fragments I've ever seen.
We have photographs of a piece of bone that was retrieved from Dealey Square, is that the name of it? By a pre-medical student, as I understand it. A fellow by the name of Harper was retained for some time and then eventually found its way into the chain of evidence here. And what I think the basic question is that we're asking, could this, and this is a one-to-one photograph, could this have been missing from President Kennedy's skull or not?
In my opinion, it could. because there was far insufficient bone to close the calvarium. In fact, we spent many hours using rubber dam and other artificial materials to do that.
Yes, this photograph that we're showing you is a color photograph of a fragment allegedly recovered by a Mr. Harper at the site of the assassination, and it contains a ruler in it, and it's a one-to-one color photograph of the fragment. The fragment's no longer available as we understand it.
I'd comment further, Dr. Petty, that it's of approximately the size, I would think, if you would compare it with the photographs of the other fragments that were brought to us.
I don't know how much distortion there is in this X-ray of the larger of the fragments that was brought to you.
That's probably just about the size it was.
A little more.
On some diagram we had, it was the measurements of this piece
We're looking at X-ray number 4, which is of 3 bony fragments, and our comment is that the color photograph that you show us of a fragment we did not see sort of approximates in size the fragments that we were presented at. And to further restate, there were sufficient fragments missing that fragment could have been.
So even though this fragment picked up by Harper, measuring some 2.5 inches in greatest dimension, even that fragment could have been put into the vacant areas in the calvarium as you've reconstructed it. Well, that's the major question I think that we wanted to have answered at this time. The second question or questions, series of questions, revolve about these photographs here, which are numbers 44 and 45. There may be a clearer one than this. Was the clearer one in black and white?
Black and white.
These are the color photographs, numbers 44 and 45. And this area, which I'm pointing to with my finger here, seems to be an area which is almost semicircular in shape. It's a gap, semicircular in shape, and appears to have beveling to the outside of the skull.
Right.
Now, what we really want to know is, where was this located? And in order to give you a chance to show it, where would this be on this skull here that I'm showing?
Doctor, the photo that you're referring to is what number? You mentioned it already.
44 and 45.
But the particular one you're talking about now is 44. 44.
And this is shown more clearly on the black and white photographs, numbers 17 and 18. Probably best in number 17. And I'm putting my finger on the same spot.
Well, to the best of my recollection, and I regret that these photographs are so poorly marked, this was in the right parietal region, approximately here.
Could it have been forward of the suture line? What do you call it? Coronal suture line. Could have been anterior to the coronal suture line. Now, these are our major questions on this.
Think about and reflect the lesion.
Well, to state what the problem was, the basic problem was, as we reflected the scalp, various fragments of bone, some fell into the cranial cavity, some came to the table, some adhered to the dura, and so forth. That it was on the right side, that it was parieto-frontal, there's no question. Now, to tell you was it anterior to the carnal suture or not, I can't tell you, unless that's a carnal suture in that photograph.
Well, we would think that perhaps this gap on photograph 26, this gap that is tending down toward the President's right ear, this V shape directed toward the President's right ear, is the same as this V-shaped gap?
I believe it is.
On your black and white number 18.
The scalp was so torn and lacerated that we never had to do any dissection there. The scalp was just laid over, and I believe that this is the scalp laying over here. As I interpret this is the shoulder down here.
Cheek and shoulder.
Yeah. And that this is just laid down like so, without having done any dissection or anything. And so this would be the right temporal area. Now, whether this was prior to or after removal of the brain tissue, I don't know.
The brain would be after. Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure that that the head isn't back in such manner. I think that this was probably taken just to show the magnitude of the wound.
Yeah, you're talking about photograph color number 44 now. Well, then, if I may ask one further question along this line, you will note on color photograph 26, just ahead of this V-shaped notch, there is a hank of hair which obscures everything.
Yes.
And the question that I'd like to propose now is that hank of hair obscuring this externally beveled portion of bone that we see in black and white number 18?
All I can tell you is it could, Dr. Petty. It could have, because these obviously in time were taken. These black and white photographs, number 18 and both 18, were taken temporarily that evening at a later hour than was this color photograph number 26 in this case.
These two are essentially identical, though.
Which two? Would you just identify them for the...
44 color and 17 black and white. These are almost identical. I would assume that one was taken with one camera and then the other one with another camera at the same...
Or the color negative may have been developed, may have been printed black and white.
Might have been.
Looks more like that to me.
So they may be actually the same photograph.
I think they are.
That was the major question that we had, because we're trying to establish, if we can, the point of outshoot of one or both of the fragments. And to the best of our analysis,
one or both of what fragments?
Bullet.
Oh.
To the best of our analysis, and we could not place which side of the coronal, is that the suture line that I'm talking about? We couldn't place whether this is on the anterior side of the coronal suture or whether it's on the posterior side of it.
The X-ray you took of the fragment that you received does show a suture line on it, so that's helpful in.
Yeah, see, we felt that this area, this one semicircular area on X-ray number 4, quite likely was at least in part the other side of a circle. That was our interpretation of this fragment. And I don't think even that would have been quite complete.
Well, we were wondering if maybe the new fragment, which was picked up by Harper, might make that circle complete somewhere, if it's possible. Now, we don't know where this fragment is at this point.
I don't see anything with quite the circumferential margin of these other.
It was.
I'm showing you now. I don't know if these photographs are marked, are they? This is a black and white enlarged photograph of Harper's fragment, labeled number 9 or 6. And I can't tell you which it is.
It's 9, I believe.
probably 9, and this would be the internal surface of the fragment. And then on the other photograph, which is the external surface, we were just wondering if this could help put a periphery or help complete the periphery of the gap there that you saw.
Caused by the missile egressing the cranial vault.
That is correct.
I don't think so. I don't think any of the borders of this fragment, to me, would coincide with this type of a wound of exit.
Mm-hmm. I see what you're driving at.
One can almost in imagination, maybe elliptical, slightly elliptical, or circular, or whichever way. It'd be hard to put any of the margins of this fragment there.
Would you take a look
How about
at
can I answer one question before you get to that? How about the lateral skull film with regard to the location of that? Is that not helpful to you?
Yes, it is helpful.
It is somewhat helpful, yes. You want to throw that one up?
There are 2 skull films.
2 and 3.
While you're looking at, for the record, Dr. Boswell, when you had discussed number 44, I think color, well, the stenographer wanted to get down, you said there was shoulder and cheek exposed.
Yes.
Shoulder.
Well, you can see when we say the fragment that you show us could have helped to close the wound and still have room for more. Hard to make out.
Well, just leave it there a minute. I'm now looking at number 2, X-ray number 2. Is this the point of entrance that I'm pointing to with my finger? No. This is not. Where is the point of entrance? It
Doesn't show.
It doesn't show.
Below the external occipital protuberance.
It's below it.
Right. Sure.
Not above it.
No. It's to the right and inferior to the external occipital protuberance.
Okay. All right. And let me show you then color photograph number 42, which then is the...
It precisely coincides with that wound on the scalp.
Could you describe that point that you just...
It's an elliptical wound of the scalp, which we described in our protocol. I'm quite confident. And it's just to the right and below by a centimeter, and maybe centimeter to the right and maybe 2 centimeters below the midpoint of the external occipital protuberance. When the scalp was reflected from there was a virtually identical wound in the occipital bone.
And what number photograph is that?
42.
42.
Then this is the entrance wound, the one
sir.
down by the margin of the hair in the back.
Yes, sir.
And then this ruler that is held in the photograph is simply to establish a scale and no more.
Exactly.
It is not intending to represent the ruler starting from some...
No way.
No. What is this opposite? Oh, it must be... I can't read it, but up close to the tip of the ruler. There you are, 2 centimeters down.
It's the posterior inferior margin of the lacerated scalp.
That's the posterior inferior margin of the
Tore right
lacerated
down
scalp.
to that point.
Right.
And then we just folded that back and this back and an anterior flat forward. And that exposed almost the entire... I guess we did have to dissect a little bit to get down
To this
point.
entrance, right. It didn't completely... Right.
But not much, because this bone was all gone, and actually the smaller fragment in this X-ray fit this piece down here. There was a hole here that only half of which was present in the bone that was intact, and this small piece then fit right on there, and the beveling on those was on the anterior surface.
Then, was this below the tentorium or above the tentorium on the inside? Do you recall?
Everything was so disrupted.
Well,
I'm not sure.
there was, the dura was completely, as you can see here, was completely destroyed practically, and I don't think there were any markings that were really very adequate to say where it was related to the tentorium. Let's see a picture of it.
It happens to be on 42, a fine line going to the local. Is that fine line going to the area you identify as the?
That's an artifact. That's an artifact of some kind.
Fine.
Right there.
Utilizing a skull that we have available.
Let Jay do it. They don't have it.
Yeah.
I've got a fiber too.
I made the last marks, Jim. You made it.
That would be a little defect.
He's reluctant to argue.
That might be right where it is.
This is a little smaller skull.
Here's a measurement.
The date.
You're going to take this back to New York with you. I don't know.
Taking that.
It's now evidence.
You just let this go.
Yeah. Now, if it goes in at the point indicated below the external occipital protuberance, then it is going to go about at the tentorium.
Of the same Dr. Petty. Approximately, yes. But you see, T-O-R-I-A-L.
I think the record should reflect that Dr. Angel just arrived and is being greeted.
In view of what we just learned, would we find out whether this, they think, is artifact when they were removing the brain?
Is Dr.
Talking about
Why don't you ask him?
All right.
While you're at it.
Yes, sir.
This is Dr. Cole asking the question.
Dr. Hume, looking at picture 46, I'm curious to know whether this destruction you feel is postmortem artifact in removing the brain, or was part of this caused by the bullet, you think, perhaps? The junction between the cerebellum and the...
No, I think it was partly caused by the bullet.
It was.
There was there was a tearing type of disruption that basically had to go back to our description. Corpus callosum was torn, was it not, Jay? And the midbrain was virtually torn from the pons.
All right. Thank you.
I don't misinterpret me that a missile necessarily passed through there, because there was a great.
But it must have come fairly close in there.
Yeah.
From the point of view of where it entered.
Yes, sir.
Pursuing the question Dr. Coe's been asking, on looking at 50 of the brain, dorsum of the brain, a question has arisen relative to a purple object in the right frontal region of the cerebrum as being a foreign object. Do you have any thoughts you can give us about that foreign object? And here is number 46 to look back on, which is the undersurface of that area.
I strongly suspect that this foreign object is something that was placed on the table in an attempt to elevate this portion of the brain so it wouldn't be as much out of focus. I think you're looking at a defect in brain substance. Because, if you try and take a picture and with a surgical specimen or what have you, and different portions of it are different levels, I think we made an attempt That certainly was not present in the brain, and I interpret that we took some object that was immediately available in the room and placed it under the brain in an attempt to bring the right cerebral hemisphere somewhat closer for a photograph than to the left.
You are completely satisfied, Dr. Hume and Dr. Boswell, there was no foreign object in this area?
Absolutely, unequivocally, without question.
Yes. Can we stop this side of the...
We interrupted for a minute.
Yeah, this is Dr. Angel.
Dr. Angel, Dr. James.
Dr. Angel, we have two photographs here representing the two sides of a fragment of what appears to be skull, which was recovered by one Harper at Dealey Plaza some little time after the assassination took place. We would like very much to have your expertise in identifying where this particular fragment of skull might have arisen. That is, what part of the head bone it came from.
Well, it's clearly parietal bone. The side, left or right, is not so easy. You can see 1, 2, 3 markings for meningeal vessels on the inner surface. This is the same
Yes. This is the same thing blown up. There, both sides are shown.
As well as some blood vessel injury. There's damage on the outside. Looks as though there's still some pericranium adhering on the outside, but I'm not really sure about that. This kind of ragged edge there. I don't think I can say anything really much sharper than that. My feeling is that was on the right side and that it's around here.
Around where?
Around this area here, below the parietal fossa, and directly above the squamous suture. I thought at first I could see marks of squamous suture here, but I don't think that's it. The suture.
We also have the negatives from which these were made. No.
Well, excuse me. No. Yes, I think that little edge is.
Here's the skull.
No, right. Let's see. Now that's that
yes.
end there is where the suture has to be, but it doesn't seem to show on the inside.
It shows
That's
the
puzzle. I think we've got suture along there. Lambdoid.
They want us to record which photographs you're examining again, and these, once again, for the record, are photographs of the segment or fragment of bone picked up by Harper at Dealey Plaza.
Mm-hmm. And photographs 13 and 8 and the two color prints are being examined by Dr. Angel at this time.
Are you sure that's a suture edge there? It appears to me.
We're not sure.
We're not sure.
You already got it.
Not sure.
That's why you're here, sir.
Would you like to see the Kodachromes?
Sure, that isn't simply a broken edge.
Kodachromes. I'm sorry, we don't have a better way of doing this.
There's an X-ray view box, Dr. Angel, might help.
I don't think this is going to I don't think those things are going to help. I don't. See, I don't think you can have this be the coronal suture, because then you would certainly have the anterior branch of the middle meningeal, some remnant of that tree going up there on it. And I thought these were the intermediate posterior branches, middle meningeal going up the side of the parietal. Here, I would have interpreted the piece as fitting here. And I would have looked here for a trace of lambdoid suture. Now, this inner surface is broken away. Perhaps that could be the very edge of the coronal suture on the right. Of course, I don't know what what damage the skull showed, and whether this has to be. That's what I'm not supposed to know.
No, Dr. Angel, feel free to discuss it. Dr. Yoon, who did the autopsies here, and be delighted to.
Dr. Angel.
Where is there an effect on the right that this would fit into?
Yes.
Yeah, there's a picture right there in color that will show you the extent of the.
Could you put that lateral view of the skull up again for Dr. Angel's benefit? Dr. Angel, there was a massive defect of this on the right. And later on in the evening, there was a portion of the right parieto-temporal bone still attached in the skull. Where is the picture here? Still attached in the skull. Where is the picture here? And at one margin of it,
identify this for everybody here. This is color photograph 44.
there was what we interpreted to be an exit wound in the location to which I point.
Mm-hmm.
The bone that would correspond and complete that circle or ellipse that might have been made by that exit wound was missing at the time we began the examination. Later on that evening, several hours into the evening, we were presented with another fragment of bone, not the one that you are examining now. And that fragment had a corresponding semicircular defect, which almost completed this, what we interpreted to be an exit wound, but not quite. And we never had the privilege of examining the fragments or photographs of this fragment that you now examine until this afternoon, and I was unaware of its existence until about 3 weeks ago.
This is a fragment that arrived quite a while later at Neiman Marcus box.
Yeah, but it never arrived to our ken. Dr. Angel, I draw your attention to the view box where you get some comprehension of the size of the defect.
These are all slightly different views. Slightly different. They're all different pictures, so I'm not sure.
No, I don't know that that makes any major difference.
Dr. Angel, let me show you also this X-ray film of the three fragments that were separate and detached from the body, which have been photographed here. And one of these three fragments, the larger of the three, is the one that apparently helped complete a portion of an outshoot wound. Is that correct?
That was our opinion, Doctor. Okay.
Right.
You may want to put these together and have this up here too. One further question, Dr. Angel. There seems to be a suture line here on this larger of the three fragments.
That seems to be quite clear.
Could that be the coronal suture?
I would have guessed that it might be. It's yes. I don't see any meningeal vessel markings. But if this exit wound is here, and the coronal suture is going up like that, that's conceivable.
Well, I think the question that we all have is whether this is anterior to the coronal suture or posterior to it.
Well, was damage that far forward?
I believe so. I think the damage is quite apparent here
Yes, it
in
is.
the
That's right.
lateral view of the skull
That's
by
right.
X-ray.
It is. I would have wanted to. Oh, well, yes.
And also on X-ray number 1, the anterior posterior view, right side.
Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, this then it could be frontal perfectly well. It doesn't show the meningeal markings, and that's what made me unhappy about it being frontal makes more sense. In that case, the exit wound must be not very far above the right or near the right pterion, I would think. That's gone in this.
For the record, Dr. Angel was reviewing bones 8 and 13 photographs and X-rays 1, 3, and 6, and comparing them at the X-ray viewbox.
That it has, and seems to have, a little portion of the of that circle on it, and the rest of that circle on this photograph.
Number 44.
Dr. Humes could probably tell you more where that is than I can. This is the right cheek, as I understand. Is that correct, Dr. Humes? And this then is the right shoulder, and the flap turned back at the time of the autopsy.
Well, this must be well forward then on the frontal bone. I was interpreting it as being this itself as being near pterion, and yet here is this gap. Seemed.
That is not frontal bone, where that semicircular.
I don't see how it can be.
Is it's either temporal or parietal bone, Dr. Angel.
I think that's what it looks like to me.
That's exactly what it is.
And in that case, I'm puzzled by the missing bone here and the angles of things. Is this to be placed more like this then, in relationship to this picture? And then this piece could fit on here, and the parietal piece could fit behind that. This piece could.
The piece, the Harper piece, could be fitted posterior and slightly lateral. Is that what you're saying?
This is what I'm saying, yes, perhaps.
Now, this is photograph 26, and it seems to show the pieces more as they were first viewed.
Yes.
And to orient this photograph and the photograph 44...
It's hard to do, Dr.
It's hard to do, but this is more or less what you're looking at, isn't it?
I think so, yes. I thought perhaps this was a little more tilted.
Well, perhaps like that.
Negative. I don't think that's true. Is this? This is
you're right. No, I think this is the...
you're right.
What's bothering me is what part of the flesh that is.
That's the cheek.
That's the right cheek. If that's the right cheek, then it can't be. It has to be more or less
Yeah.
this way. That's hard. It's really hard to be sure to square this with the X-ray, which shows so much bone lost in this right frontal area.
Well, I think there may be more bone apparently lost than is actually lost in the x-rays. We don't know when those x-rays were taken. Dr. Hume, do you perchance know at what phase of the autopsy the x-rays were taken? Were these taken before the brain was removed or afterwards?
Yes.
The first thing.
All of the x-rays were taken before any manipulations were performed.
Some of the bone fragments, though, are partially extruded, so that
they're not in the
as we see on number 1.
Yes. Some of them were adherent to partially a whole scalp.
Yeah. Which accounts for some of the missing bone.
It's hard to do that particular jigsaw puzzle. That's all I can say. I was looking somewhere here for a temporal line, and I can't see any clear indication of it. And that should be running up like that. And so it was hard for me to put this.
Well,
these two.
We believe that in photograph 44, the V-shaped notch here is the same as the V-shaped notch that you see in photograph number 26. This then would give you the angle at which these two photographs should be corresponding, and that would seem to fit pretty well.
So in that case, this exit wound is really in front of it. It's in front of that notch. It's there. It's in front of that. See what I mean? It would have to be along here.
Would that suture line help at all?
Yes. If that's as it looks like, a piece of frontal bone that fitted here, like that, and the wound is about here, that would fit.
Now, would this be below the hairline? Because this appears above the hairline.
No, it would have to be above the hairline.
At this point, this would be...
In that case, this fragment here, a parietal, could very easily fit back here. It looks like there's another fragment in here out of place, which I can't see what I mean.
Well, it's terribly fragmented, and we can't really reconstruct it at all.
Yes. Perhaps this piece. And this piece of parietal, that sharp edge there, could conceivably have fitted on here, behind this fragment, which looks as though it's the front lower part, and anterior portion of the right parietal. I interpreted this originally as being roughly the middle of the right parietal, and I still think so.
Well, our ultimate question is, do you think this could well be part of the skull of the late president? Referring now to the Harper piece.
Yes.
And you think it would fit also, don't you, Dr. Young?
Yes, I have great difficulty in orientation of 44 and 45, Petty, and I share your problem, and I'd like to spend some time with it. I have great difficulty.
That's these two? Yes. Good use of this. Yes, so do I. I wish the hair were not obscuring that little notch, because I think this really has to be the frontal. If that V is the same as this, it has to be somewhere around here.
The hairline would be where on the skull?
It's not too around here. That would be just about at the hairline, or just above it. Here, and in front of the temporal line, which I couldn't see. That was what was bothering me. I couldn't see any temporal line on here. And if the temporal line is, this is really the forehead. This is the scalp reflected down as it ordinarily would be, then that makes sense.
I believe it is the forehead, and the scalp is reflected down.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Dr. Hume, would you buy this? Would you buy that here is the scalp on picture 44, and it's been reflected down over the face, right here.
Yes.
And that this then really could very well be the frontal.
Right. Now I'm much happier. I will buy that completely.
Okay.
And that's where that was.
Yeah, well, this makes more sense to me.
See that, Jay?
It looks
We
like
reflected the scalp here. This is the exit wound where I thought it was. This is the back of his head here. This is the back of his shoulder.
these two are lined up just about right now.
Right.
See, this notch is pointing in the same direction here. And this would be in the frontal area and anterior to the coronal suture in all probability.
Right.
Do you see that, Dr. Davis?
Yeah.
That this then would be in the frontal bone and anterior to the coronal suture.
Which I think is consistent with the x-rays, the lateral films, and fits in with that.
More comfortable now?
Much. Now, may I ask you one other question on this x-ray, Dr. Hill?
Yes.
Here's a view taken, I assume, with the radiation point above the face and the film behind the back of the head.
Not being a radiologist, I would presume that.
If that's true, then the least distorted and least fuzzy portion of the radiopaque materials would be closest to the film, and we would assume then that this peculiar semi-lunar object with the sharp edges would be close to the film and therefore represent the piece that was seen in the lateral view.
Up by the eyebrow?
No, up by the in the back of the skull. Get this out of the picture.
Could you tell the numbers of the two that you're talking about?
Yeah. I'm sorry, I keep forgetting these numbers. We're looking at rentgenogram numbers 1 and 2. The first is a anterior-posterior view of the head. The second is a lateral view of the head, and we're trying to establish whether this particular sharp-edged radio-opaque defect is close to the back of the skull or close to the front of the skull.
I can't be sure I see it in the lateral at all. Can you? Do you think you see it?
Right here.
That's it. Should be.
Were these fragments that we see recovered at all?
No.
They were not.
No.
I can understand why they weren't.
I think there were
3 or 4
there were 3 or 4
tiny
little
ones.
spaces, and they
Right.
those I think those are here in the archives.
There were a few. Now, do I recall anyone? The X-ray, as you know, doesn't tell me how large that was or what its bulk, what its mass was. Most of the fragments that we recovered were grains of sand type fragments.
Yeah, millimeter.
I don't recall them of that size.
So that placing the outshoot wound in the right frontal bone toward the coronal suture is probably about where it was.
Mm-hmm.
Joe, Davis?
Yeah.
You have questions, I think, about the in-shoot area, do you?
Well, in terms of the in-shoot, my impression when I first looked at these films was that in-shoot was higher, and I equated that with the lesion in photograph, I believe it's 26, the color photograph. Well, there's 43. And I interpreted... Which one is this?
This is 42.
Okay.
We were wondering if that had been the issue.
No, it's no wound.
Because in 42, I interpreted that as a wound, and the other is lower down in the neck as just being a contaminant, a piece of brain tissue.
That was a wound, and the wound on the skull precisely coincided with it.
Well, it was a tunnel.
Yeah, tunnel for a ways.
Yeah, it's longer than it is wide, and it tunneled along, and actually under here, and then the actual bony defect was above the...
And this photograph, number 45, I am quite convinced is an attempt to demonstrate that wound. And not a very successful one, I'm afraid, because I can't for sure pick it out. That is it. See, this, I believe, is taken looking down at the inside of the posterior cranial fossa.
Looking towards over here.
Right. Right.
And what we see here is a lot of red and fragmented bone.
Dr. Hume, Dr. Boswell, have you discussed these photographs with the other pathologists who have previously gone over this material?
No, I have not.
I went over photographs with him.
Because at least as the way one of them writes, I had the impression that they apparently thought it was I was just curious.
I mean, our written description,
I know, your written description
clearly, I think, indicates that point right there.
But they describe some of them, the infants they feel being 10 centimeters above the occipital protuberance.
Negative.
Well, there have been all sorts of changes from the original. I mean, right and left, up and down.
No, but that's why I was interested in whether they had discussed it with the pathologist or whether the pathologist had been interpreting entirely the photographs when they made that statement.
So, on photograph 42, then down right at the hairline, almost in the midline, is the in-shoot wound. And this photograph is not taken with the in-shoot wound centered in the photograph, but rather the posterior extension of the scalp tear is the subject of the photograph.
Or, again, to be sure that it was related to the gentleman's head, rather than focusing specifically on the wound. No, I don't think we took the photograph specifically at that site. You did. No.
And you say, Dr. Boswell, that the bullet entered the skin and that the wound in the skull was a little above that, because apparently the bullet had tunneled a little under the skin. And then that corresponds with the diagram that I saw, which showed a point on the back of the body diagram with a arrow pointing upward and slightly to the left.
You're talking about something, I don't know what you're referring to.
Let me interrupt for 1 second? Dr. Angel has to go at this point, but in summary, you're pointing to the skull, the x-rays, and the photographs, and the x-ray of the fragment of bone that was taken by Dr. Humes during the autopsy would indicate that the exit perforation is where?
Well, in here, I think, above the temporal line. That triangular fragment, I think, would fit from just short of the fragment down to the edge of the exit perforation, and then across this way, fitting in a sort of a triangle in the upper part of the front of it.
So that
I think that's the best fit that I could estimate from seeing the X-rays.
and this would place the exit gunshot wound just anterior and almost incorporated into the lateral aspect of the coronal suture line.
A little in front of it, yes.
Slightly in front of it, just superior to the temporal bone.
Apparently above the hairline. His hairline was fairly low. He wasn't getting bald like me. So, yes. So, I think an exit wound about there would fit that fragment if you have
just anterior
fragments of lead on it.
Just anterior to the coronal suture.
Just anterior to the coronal suture, yes, and well above the pterion, far above the pterion, near the point where the temporal line crosses the coronal suture. We have a name for it, right? Give you the name.
What's the
Okay,
name?
fine. Stefania.
Stefania?
Stefania, it's good to see you again. I'd drop over and see you at your shop, but I probably won't have time.
I'm dashing also anyway.
I think we should also record that Dr. Angel graciously came over at a moment's notice to help us with these interpretations.
Thank you very much.
And we're most grateful.
Perhaps we can take a few minutes break here and let me give us
One
some
question is still before us. Dr. Boswell, this is the diagram that I was referring to a moment ago with the point of...
Could you identify in some way what it is?
The face sheet of Dr. Hume's protocol.
Okay. Which shows an in-shoot wound on the back of the head and an arrow pointing upward and to the left.
That just meant up.
That just meant up.
Right.
It wasn't tending to indicate direction or anything.
No.
And do you know what this word was? It says ragged, and then the reproduction has lost something here. The next word I can't make out. Let's take a break there.
No.
Can't make it out either.
I'm sorry, I can't either.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Boswell, was it the Clark Commission or the Rockefeller Commission physicians that you spoke with? Remember?
Clark.
The Clark.
Dr. Fisher and Dr. Morris.
Yes, right.
Second.
Now,
They want to have a break.
at the break, we'll perhaps they can review the original notes, and that will,
Ragged slanting is what it says.
and then we'll discuss that after the break.
Right.
Okay.
Continuing after coffee break, we were just discussing the original face sheet documents, and perhaps Dr. Boswell, would you be able to just explain what you wrote, what other people wrote on the front and back of that?
Well, the weights of the organs are not written by me. Everything else on here is mine. All of the notes on the diagrams are mine, and this diagram on the back is mine, this and this.
Could you explain the diagram on the back?
Well, this was an attempt to illustrate the magnitude of the wound again, and as you can see, it is 10 centimeters from right to left, 17 centimeters from posterior to anterior. This was a piece of 10-centimeter bone that was fractured off of the skull and was attached to the undersurface of the skull. There were fragments attached to the skull, or to the scalp, all the three major flaps. Falx bone from sagittal sinus. I guess I'm not sure in retrospect what I meant by that.
May I ask you, Dr. Boswell, if this diagram depicts in any way to indicate the same V-shaped notch that we saw on some of the color photographs, namely, and I have it in number 27 here, would this notch be the same as the notch that we see that points more or less toward the right ear?
I believe so. Here. And what this was meant to depict at this point, I don't know.
Well, having gone through a lot of smashed skulls and composite injuries, I know precisely what you're grappling with.
I think I'll interpret his fracture through the floor. That's through the floor of the orbit.
Of the orbital cavity.
Right. It was an explosion had fractured.
We also also had a question about photograph number, is this 10 or is this 12? 12. This is the wound on the right upper thoracic wall, posterior. Is this small fragment of dark staining material simply blood? It's the one that's perhaps 4 or 5 centimeters below and to the left of the wound itself.
There was no wound or no damage there at all.
Yes, this is the other photograph, which is horribly blurred for reasons inapparent. This is photograph number 40 and 41. These two show the right anterior aspect of the head, neck, and chest of the late president, and there is a notch which we see. It's very blurred, and it really doesn't seem to be so much of a notch as a semicircular defect in the central portion of the inferior margin of this gaping wound. Is that what was considered to be a partial bullet wound
of exit? Yes. That was what we ultimately concluded, yes.
The reason I specifically bring this up is somebody somewhere along the line has changed this from the lower margin to the upper margin, and we just couldn't see that.
You see, Dr. Perry informed us that he went right through that wound to make his tracheotomy.
We're talking about also photos 13 and 14.
Yes, sir.
In the further discussing the exit perforation through the tracheostomy, did you have occasion to explore in the neck area beyond what is in the protocol, beyond what the description is, as to what was injured?
Well, the trachea, I think we described an irregular or jagged wound of the trachea. And then we described a contusion in the apex of the lung and the inferior surface of the dome of the right pleural cavity. And that's one photograph that we were distressed not to find when we first went through and cataloged these photographs, because I distinctly recall going to great lengths to try and get the upper interior portion of the right thorax illuminated, the technical difficulties with that and getting the camera position and so forth. And what happened to that, I don't know. There were a couple of films that apparently had been exposed to light or whatever and not developed, but we never saw that photograph.
From the time you first examined them, that particular photograph was never
available to us. No. But we felt it coincided very neatly with the path as we ultimately felt that missile took.
There are, continuing that path, there is described, and in looking at the x-rays taken, some opaque material to the right of the cervical spine, which has been interpreted as being tiny bullet or bone fragments. Would the track, as you recall it, be consistent with the missile striking a transverse process?
Well, I must confess that we didn't make that interpretation at the time. I'm familiar with the writings of Dr. John Latimer, and I've seen reprints of his articles, and I have to go back and restudy it the way he has done. But as you can see from the point of entrance, it wasn't that far lateral that it could conceivably have nicked at the edge of a transverse process.
And it was tending further to the left as it went.
Well, sure, because it came out in the middle line.
Just a report, you say it could have nicked.
It could have. I don't know.
Can I go back to this interpretation? And it's going to have to include some of the interpretation of this committee in order to ask you the question. And I don't really mean to belabor the point, but we need to be certain as we can about, I'm showing you now photograph 15.
Yes, sir.
And here, to
put it in the record is the posterior hairline or margin of the hair of the late president, and there near the midline and just a centimeter or two above the hairline is an area that you refer to as the in-shoot wound.
Yes, sir.
Also on this same photograph is a ruler, and approximately 2 centimeters or so down the ruler and just to the right of it is a second apparent area of defect. And this has been enlarged and is shown to you in an enlargement, I guess number 16, which shows you right opposite the 1 centimeter mark on the ruler this defect, or what appears to be a defect. I don't see that it connects with the scalp lacerated margin anywhere.
And number 15 shows an enlargement of the lower area that's suggestive of an in-shoot to you.
And what we're trying to do is to satisfy ourselves that the bullet actually came in near the margin of the hair and not near the tip of the ruler as is shown in photograph number 16.
See, I'm not. See, this is an enlargement of from that other photograph, right?
It's an enlargement from photograph number.
Dr.
15.
Boswell offered the interpretation that it might be an extension of a scalp wound. I don't share his opinion about that. I don't know what that is, number one. I can assure you that as we reflected the scalp to get to this point, there was no defect corresponding to this in the skull at any point. I don't know what that is. It could be, to me, clotted blood. I just don't know what it is, but it certainly was not any wound of entrance.
May I interject? I think perhaps it's time now for some correlations. We have here Zapruder black and white copies of Zapruder film frames number 311, 312, and 313. The 313 being at the moment when the head actually exploded, 311 and 312 being the position of the head immediately prior. We have these photographs here, and we have the lateral x-rays, the x-ray number 2. But I think perhaps what we can consider is the problem of the tangential bullet which enters the head, tunnels, and that's already been testified to and seems reasonable, strikes bone tangentially, fragments, and then one part of a fragment can skip out through the scalp again, which may explain this wound we see here in enlargement number 16. Now, the evidence for that on X-ray would be a trail of radiopaque spots, which, with a magnifying lens, we can see in film number 2, extending in an upward direction from the region of the external occipital protuberance. And immediately the upper portion of this, in an area where there's a large defect in the posterior parietal bone, there is radiopaque material, some of which appears to be even exterior, at least in this view. There is also continuation of radiopaque fragments in the vertex part of the interior of the head, and also continuation straight ahead. So I think there's some more down here in the mid-posterior head. So I think all of us who have done a fair number of investigations like this are well aware that a bullet can split in fragments. And one fragment can reflect out, or be deflected outward. Another fragment can be deflected inward and slightly upward. And even a third fragment can go straight. There's all sorts of things can happen with bullets when they strike in this manner. I think I can see radiopaque trails going up, which could reconcile the testimony and opinion of Dr. Hume that this material, this brain material, represents the loss of brain from the entrance site And also, it reconciles with his statement and also Dr. Boswell's statement that there was tunneling. And I think it also fits in with Zapruder frames 311 and 312 immediately before 313, where the head explodes, in which in 311 and in 312 we see the president sitting, his chin is down, and it's hard to say which way the head is turned in this, because this is black and white photographs, and they're enlargements and are slightly blurred. But it would be consistent then with the bullet striking, and we all recognize that this is fairly thick and dense bone, and that in itself would add to the propensity to split a bullet. So I'm advancing that as an investigative hypothesis or investigative opinion for discussion at this time to see if we can arrive at a consensus.
I would like to comment further from our point of view that these enlargements which you have shown us now of this other photograph are the first time I have seen these enlargements. I have not.
These were just made up 2 or 3 days ago. 2 days ago.
Oh, man. May I make a comment on what you just said, Dr. Davis? The problem, as I see it, is that if this were, in fact, a tunneling situation with the bullet scooting along the skull here somewhere and not entering the skull down below, is that what you're saying now?
Well, I'm saying, what I'm inferring, in the absence of photographs and specific measurements, we can only conjecture as to how long the tunneling is. But I would envision this as a tunneling first into an entry into the scalp.
Gentlemen, may I say something?
Yes.
I don't think discussion
Should be on here.
All right.
I agree.
Recording this. This is for us to decide between ourselves.
Well,
I don't think we
I
belong to
preface
this
this by saying we would have to say something about our feeling as to why we're so interested in that one particular area.
Could I make a comment that I think would be helpful to you? And you can throw out anything I say, or whatever, but I feel obligated to make a certain interjection at this point, having heard this theory, which I had heard a little bit, because I didn't pay that much attention, quite frankly, in the our attention was obviously directed to what we understood and saw to be clearly a wound of entrance. If such a fragment were to have detached itself from the main mass of the missile, it would have to be a relatively small fragment, because the size of the defect in the skull, which approximated this point, was almost identical with the size of the defect in the skin. You follow that?
Yes, that makes sense. I mean, I've seen the same thing.
Probably a bit. Part of the casing comes off.
The reason we are so interested in this afternoon is because other pathologists have interpreted the...
I don't think this belongs.
No, probably not.
You guys are nuts.
George?
I think nuts writing this down. It doesn't belong to that guy.
I think the only purpose of it being on the record is to explain to Dr. Humes
Right, then turn off the record and explain to him, and then go back and talk again.
what our problems are, not to get our opinions, but to get his opinions.
Right, to keep our opinions off. Here's Charles and Joe talking like that, and the guy on record. It doesn't belong. All right.
But Dr. Humes, I guess realizing our concerns, if there's anything that you can say that would, or Dr. Boswell, that could help clarify any further the entrance and tracks of the bullet in the head would be much appreciated by us.
No, I think we're at a distinct disadvantage because, as I said, when we cataloged the photographs and numbered them, number 15, and we spent a half a day doing it, or a day, number 15 we clearly recognized, and I'll confess to possibly even overlooking the area that to which you gentlemen and apparently someone else has directed attention. I would not attempt to make an interpretation of what it represents because I can't at this point.
But at the time of the autopsy, there was no defect in the scalp.
Right.
Nor was there defect in the underlying bone. Other than that, the spread bone was gone.
When you say defect, you're talking about this. You're talking about a major defect in a bullet that's entering the
I'm sure that our record describes the tunneling of that wound of entry pretty well, at least as to length and distance beneath the skin, doesn't it? I can't recall the description, but I'm sure it is there.
I'm looking for the color photograph that coincides with the 15th.
Which one? Yes, sir. Yeah, 42 is one of those. Yeah.
Yeah. See, this quote-unquote defect is a quote-unquote defect in my mind. I'm not sure what that is. I'm not sure. It's got some clotted blood that's lying on the skull.
Yeah. What we're trying to do, I think, is just to have your best opinions and recollections that we can deal with.
Right.
Now, and much of this goes toward the head wound and also the neck wound. Is there anything further more about the wound of the back that exits the neck that you could recall independently relative to what isn't in the record, such as you described the trachea? Do you remember anything about the carotid arteries, the carotid sheath area?
It had to have passed medial to the right carotid bundle.
Medial. And was there a lot of hemorrhage in that area?
There was moderate hemorrhage in the soft tissues.
In the area of the trachea and that side.
Right.
George, is there anything further you'd like to add?
Can I just for a moment, till we go off the record, I want to change the batteries here, okay?
Show me by a photograph, nor can you obviously, where the external occipital protuberance is. I can't show you where it is on this photograph to my satisfaction.
Well, the thing that we found...
the written notes to be sure there's not a transcription error.
Yeah, excuse me. Here's the written notes. And could you also check, well, let me check here, where you wrote down the measurements. So, Andy is... Situated on the... Oh, sorry.
Situated in the upper right thorax. That's the thorax.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
May I have these? We're working on it. Okay. This is on page 4.
Missile wounds.
No, it comes after missile, considerable amount of missile wound. Then you get it. Situated in the posterior. What's that?
Scalp, approximately 2 centimeters laterally to the right. So when it says
That's right.
laterally to the right and slightly above the external occipital protuberance is a lacerated wound. And could I describe for your edification, because you may wish to go back and look and see some corrections and whatever to this note. There's another facet of this that let's go there. Having completed the examination, others might be interested in this.
Yeah, come on. We're in session, Joe. I'm sorry, Dr. Boswell, you might be able to...
Having completed the examination and remaining to assist the morticians in the preparation of the body, we did not leave the autopsy room until about 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. It was clearly obvious that a committee could not write the report. I had another commitment for that morning, a little later, a religious commitment with one of my children. So I went home and took care of that. Slept for several hours till about 6 o'clock in the evening of the day after. And then sat down and wrote the report that's sitting before you now. Myself, my own version of it, without any input other than the discussions that we collectively had, Dr. Boswell, Dr. Fink, and myself. But then returned returned that morning and looked at what I had written. Oh, wait, I'm a day ahead of myself. Sunday, we did that. Yeah. Saturday morning, we discussed the...
Saturday morning, we got together and
we called Dallas. See, we were at a loss because we hadn't appreciated the exit wound in the neck. And we had been in community. I had to go back a little bit, I think, for your edification. There were 4 times as many people in the room most of the time as there are in this room at this moment, including the physician to the president, the surgeon general of the Navy, the commanding officer of the Naval Medical Center, the commanding officer of the Naval Medical School, the Army, Navy, and Air Force aides to the President of the United States at one time or another, the Secret Service, the FBI, and countless nondescript people who were unknown to me. Mistake number 1. So there was considerable confusion. So we went home. I took care of this obligation that I had to refresh my mind. We met together around noon on Saturday. 11 o'clock in the morning, perhaps 10:30, something like that.
Now, this is the day after.
The day after. Within 6 or 8 hours of having completed the examination, assisting callers and so forth for the preparation of the president's remains. We got together and discussed our problem. We said we got to talk to the people in Dallas. We should have talked to them the night before, but there's no way we could get out of the room. You have to understand that situation, that hysterical situation that existed. And how we kept our wits about us as well as we did is amazing to me. I don't know how we managed to do as poorly or as well as we did under the circumstances. So I called Dr. Perry, took me a little while to reach him. We had a very nice conversation on the phone, in which he described a missile wound, what he interpreted a missile wound in the midline of the neck, through which he had created a very quick and emergency, as you can see from the photographs, tracheotomy incision. In effect, destroying its value to us and obscuring it very gorgeously for us. Well, of course, the minute he said that to me, the lights went on, and we said, oh, we have some place for our missile to have gone. And then, of course, I asked him, much to my amazement, had he or any other physician in attendance upon the president examined the back of the patient, his neck or his shoulder? They said no, the patient had never been moved from his back while they were ministering to him. So the confusion that existed from some of his comments and the comments of other standby people in the emergency room in Dallas had been in the news media and elsewhere, so that added to the confusion. So, following that discussion, and we having a meeting of the minds as to generally what was necessary to be accomplished, and being informed by various and sundry people in authority that our gross report should be delivered to the White House physician no later than Sunday evening, the next day, 24 hours later, or not quite 24 hours later. Not having slept for about 48 hours, I went home and rested from noon till 8 or 10 o'clock on that evening, Saturday evening, and then I sat down, and from the other notes which I had made, minor comments, handwritten notes, I wrote the report which is present here now. You also have here, and since it's in the record I want to comment about, some comments that I destroyed some notes related to this by burning in the fireplace of my home. And that is true. And however, nothing that was destroyed is not present in this write-up. Now, why did I do that? It's interesting. And I've not spoken of this in public. Not long before this, I'd had the experience serving as an escort officer for some foreign physicians from foreign navies who were being entertained and given a course of instruction in the United States. We had 20 or 30 of these chaps, and they used to come through every year or two, and I often was escort officer for them. They spent 5 weeks in Washington and 5 weeks in the field, and we went various places. We went to submarine bases and Marine Corps installations and naval training centers to teach them how physicians function in the American Navy. One of the places which I happened to take them, and we tried to teach them a little Americana, I took them to Greenfield Village, which is, many of you know, Henry Ford set up adjacent to his former home in suburban Detroit, Dearborn. And in that location is a courthouse in which President Lincoln used to hold forth when he was riding the circuit. And these men were very impressed with that, and they knew who President Lincoln was, and they were very impressed, and with his courthouse and many other things in Greenfield Village. But what I was amazed to find there, because I personally did not know it was there until I made that visit, was the chair in which President Lincoln sat when he was assassinated. Somehow or other, they got that chair out of Ford Theater, and Henry Ford got it into Greenfield Village, and it's sitting in this courthouse. Now, the back of that chair is stained with a dark substance. And there's much discussion to this day as to whether that stain represents the blood of the deceased president or whether it is Macassar. I don't know if you all remember what Macassar is. When people our age were young, you visited your grandmother, on the back of the sofa there were lovely lace doilies in the homes of many people. And I think you recall what I'm speaking of, in sofas and reclining chairs. And those lace doilies bear the name antimacassar. You can go to a store in this country and buy an antimacassar. They don't exist anymore. And macassar was a hairdressing that gentlemen wore in those days to keep their hair in place. And these officers were very appalled that the American people would wish to have an object stained with the blood of the president on public display. And it kind of bothered me a little bit, so it still does, to this day. And here I was now, in possession of a number of pieces of paper, some of which, unavoidably, and in the confusion which I described to you earlier, stained in part with the blood of our deceased president. And I knew that I had to turn whatever I would record over to some person or persons in authority. And I felt that was an inappropriate kind of pieces of paper to be turning over to anyone. And it was for that reason and that reason only that, having transcribed those notes onto the pieces of paper that are before you, that I destroyed those pieces of paper. I think I'd do the same thing tomorrow if I had a similar problem. But I felt they'd fall into the hands of some sensational seeker.
But clearly, everything you had on the notes
is in these papers.
Recorded in the holographic document before you, which is in the archives.
Correct.
You wrote.
Correct. Now, there are corrections and comment and changes of language in here. I think I'd have to go through them with care to see if some of them are substantive or not substantive. And they are a result of meeting with Dr. Boswell and Dr. Fink on Sunday afternoon in the Naval Medical Center and going over them together. This document then was signed by all three of us, whereas the part before some minor, I believe that all minor changes were made, maybe some of them sounded like they expressed an opinion, and we thought maybe that wasn't what should be done. But anyway, this document then was signed by all three of us. And parenthetically, in the middle of this preparation, other naval officers were not, no one was telling us anything. We did this strictly on our own, but in an adjacent room and awaiting the results of our efforts were other senior naval officers watching the television, and it was at that point, of course, that Mr. Boswell was assassinated or shot. And, in fact, we interrupted our work to try to figure out what that meant to us. So, in any event, then this document was typed up under my immediate supervision by a woman, secretary to the commanding officer at the Naval Medical Center, and I personally hand-carried the written document to the office of the White House physician about 6 o'clock on Sunday evening.
Let the record reflect that Mr. Oswald's preliminary document, also much later time, Mr. Ruby's documents, the preliminary ones, were also taken care of at 6 o'clock. She would not fall into the other areas where there would be some.
I don't wish to apologize because I don't think apology is necessary, but I'd like this document, this record, to reflect exactly what happened someplace, because it did.
Well, I do the same thing. I have frequently redrawn diagrams that might have gotten a spot of blood on them.
Now, I didn't redraw J's, and don't ask me why. Because it was, I guess, because I didn't have another piece of paper, and I didn't want to sit down and reproduce a drawing.
Nor do I apologize for doing it. Let the record know that the previous speaker twice now has been Dr. Rose, who did the autopsies on Mr. Oswald and Mr. Ruby. Performed.
Okay, now the reason that we were referring to these was some discussion between Dr. Petty and myself as to the verbal location of the wound, what we interpreted as a wound of entrance. And my problem is that these are, to my
my recollection, my interpretation of what I saw. The problem that we have now, I think, in the photographs, at least in part, may or may not explain the situation totally to everybody's satisfaction. The photographs do not clearly demonstrate, as they don't know most of us, where our external occipital protuberance is. And that's the only comment I can make, Chuck, about that. Where you would feel, perhaps from looking at this, that the wound was in fact below the external occipital, or certainly no worse than lateral to it, or no different than lateral to it.
We have some interesting information in the form of the photographs of the brain, and if this wound were way low, we would wonder at the intact nature not only of the cerebellum, but also the posterior aspects of the occipital lobes, such as are shown in figure 21. Here, the cerebellum is intact, as well as the occipital lobes.
Right.
And this has concerned us right down the line as to where precisely the in-shoot wound was. And this is why we found ourselves in a quandary, and one of the reasons that we very much wanted to have you come down today.
I understand. The photographs, unfortunately, are not three-dimensional, and that's part of the difficulty.
Just to add one comment. Earlier, the batteries in the treatment cover were being changed. I was asking Dr. Boswell if he had an opportunity in some previous time to meet with a group of pathologists such as ourselves, forensic pathologists, and the photographs, and go over all of this material together to more or less get a consensus. And correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Boswell, it was your impression that this opportunity had never been previously afforded either yourself, and how about you, Dr. Holden? Have you had this opportunity?
Absolutely not.
All right, so basically this is the first time that the original people who were there at the autopsy, saw things with their own eyes, wrote reports, have ever had an opportunity to sit down and view these pictures in the company of other pathologists. Now, there have been previous other forensic pathologists, with the exception of Dr. Fink, who was one of the original ones, but he didn't have access to the pictures.
Well, I was here with them merely to identify photographs and X-rays and whatever other material they went over, and I did answer for them any questions I could, but there was no discussion at that time as to their opinions. They formulated those after I was.
So basically, then, there's never been any free association of ideas, a gelling of ideas, and clarification of small points that might be interpreted differently from one person to another. So this apparently is the first time that a group has got together and really sat down and hashed over a case, as we so frequently do in our everyday practice.
Dr. Boswell, you and I also were talking during the period when the machine was not actively recording, and you said something that interested me tremendously. May I read from page 4 of the autopsy report? Situated in the posterior scalp, excuse me, approximately 2.5 centimeters laterally to the right and slightly above the external occipital protuberance is a lacerated wound measuring 15 by 6 millimeters. And I believe you said that the 15 millimeter dimension represented, as you described it, tunneling of the bullet. And that's what you mean by tunneling.
Yes. For the record, you said yes to that, Dr.
Yes.
Now, continuing with that description that Dr. Hume wrote down in this handwritten report that you described just now making, that particular measurement Dr. Petty referred to is not indicated on the face sheet chart, whereas the wound in the shoulder is referring to the 2.5 centimeters laterally and to the right and slightly above the external occipital protuberance, that particular measurement. Was that measurement present on your other notes that you utilized?
Yes, sir.
So that you did make that directly from notes taken at the time of the autopsy.
Right.
And then transcribed.
Transcribed.
Thank you. Dr. Boswell, I think you may have covered this once before. In the diagram which you made, the notational diagram on the same front sheet, there's an arrow going toward the left on the same perforation in the near the external occipital protuberance. What does the arrow to the left mean?
I think it was only meant to indicate upward, not laterality at all.
Indicate that it went to the left.
Yes, right.
Thank you.
Sir, it'd be possible for Dr. McGee and Dr. Boswell to look at that one picture that is imputed to show the posterior cranial fossa, and if the two of them could possibly pick out that whole thing in the posterior cranial fossa.
Dr. Petty. Dr. Petty. Dr. Petty, when you locate the proper photos, could you repeat the question again? Because I doubt that the machine would have picked it up.
Maybe Dr. Locum could come and repeat it into the machine so that he's also part of the record.
The question is, could you, Dr. Hume or Dr. Boswell, either one, from examination of the photograph purported to show the posterior cranial fossa, and I don't think that's the one, locate the point of in-shoot into the skull. Now, we're looking at photograph 44. I think there is, but I don't see it here, you know.
There is.
Yes.
This is it.
You find it?
Yes.
What number is that, please?
The black and white photograph is number 17. The color is 44.
That's not the one. That's not the one. That's the extra one. That's the extra one. I want the one in the posterior cranial baldness.
I see the external.
The picture looking down in the posterior cranial baldness. The brain has been removed.
It's the one that Dr. Hume identified.
There's one that we didn't have any idea what it was.
We've already got these identified.
No, it's back here, you see.
There is a picture here because Dr. Hume has already looked at it.
I believe that this is it.
That's the same picture. Sure. That's the only photograph of the inside.
Could this be the one that's on the inside that you said earlier was looking down in the
That's the one right there.
That is number 45.
Could you two possibly, thinking back 16 years, I know how difficult it is, but is there any way that you could show us where the entrance was in that room?
I don't believe it's depicted in that picture.
How about here, Jay?
Well, I don't believe so because, as I recall, the bone was intact at that point. There was a shell,
Right.
and then a little hole came up on the sides, and then one of the smaller of the two fragments in that X-ray. When that arrived, we were able to fit that down there and complete the circumference of that bone wound.
I don't remember that in that detail, and I suspect. You see, the background there seems to be blue.
Yes.
There's a blue towel placed beneath the head of the president, and I think that that may be the right there.
Now, can you orient this for us, Dr. Hume? I'm a little confused on exactly.
This is like that.
Well, we're talking of an entrance room someplace in here, aren't we?
We're talking about entrance room.
Here's the frame.
This is the protuberance.
Internal protuberance.
The internal is
External. That's on page 171 of.
Great. Now, is this picture oriented like that, or is it like this? Because if this is cheek, this has to be posterior dorsal. Yes. So the wound has got to be somewhere where Dr. Hume has pointed, because is this... What's this? This is the...
No, we're not showing. But why would we go to the trouble of putting the ruler there, you see?
That's the occipital sinus.
This is reflected scalp.
I think the biggest point in consideration here is that this is in focus here, and this is not in focus here.
Right.
Therefore, we must be looking specifically in that area.
Well, but did the person who took the photographs ask you what to take, or just took what he thought?
No, he was directed.
He was taking specific areas.
Real problem.
No, they've got it lined up all right. It's just a matter that you can't.
I don't think the photograph permits us to say with accuracy where it is. And recall, again, that we were not privileged to see these photographs until the date on the legend that comes with it, 1966 sometime.
But the point of entry on the external surface of the body, of the head, is only incidentally depicted in photograph 15 and shows near the margin of the photograph down toward the hairline of the president. And again, here on 43, it shows the same thing.
I object to your word incidentally.
Well, by that, I mean it's not the subject of the center of the photographer's lens. It's way down toward the margin.
But you'd have greater difficulty localizing it, I submit to you, where at the subject of the photographer's lens.
That's
well,
true.
I can understand that, sure.
That's true. One of the things in looking at the film, Dr. Hume, is one interpretation I had was that perhaps you were holding
the scalp up, holding the head up.
Holding the scalp and head up specifically so the photographer could get that point.
Not that point.
But that is not.
That is not the case. Because I submit to you that despite the fact that in this upper point that has been the source of some discussion here this afternoon is excessively obvious in the color photograph, I almost defy you to find it in that magnification in the black and white.
With difficulty. No, what we're trying to do.
I understand completely your problem.
Was mentioned earlier, we're not trying to be argumentative.
Nor
what we're trying to do is fully understand what you saw and what you did.
And the gentleman was in the dorsal recumbent position on an autopsy table, not the greatest photographic instrument in the world. We had to hold his head up. One of us is lifting the head, flexing the neck, if you will, by holding the scalp, and to show the photograph, to show the wound where it was in relation to the man's head.
And in reviewing this material, you made a notation on the skull that we had here as to the entrance perforation, and is that in reviewing this at this point and reviewing all the films,
Another way.
is that still a valid representation?
Yeah, I think so.
Good. Dr. Boswell. This refers to the notation made on the skull we're using in the exhibit, which is signed, initialed by Dr. Hume.
I believe that that's a reasonable representation.
Hume's. Dr. Hume's, I'm sorry.
I just had to add because
I
think that we were making an attempt, and of course we didn't have Polaroid in those days like we might use now to be sure that we had an image of what we wished, and it's interesting how technology changes things. We were attempting in that photograph to demonstrate that wound, and I feel that we have failed.
Would it be fair
to demonstrate the wound?
Would it be fair to say, Dr. Humes, if in the confusion that was put upon you, as you described earlier, in doing the autopsy and taking photographs, I think there's a point mentioned someplace in somebody's notes that you had asked who was in charge in the autopsy room. Whether that has significance as to... it has been interpreted as being that you were under certain direction prior to starting the autopsy as to the extent of your autopsy.
That was an anecdotal comment in that as we were informed that the President was going to be brought for an examination, I put on a scrub suit and went to the vicinity of the morgue to await the arrival of the people accompanying the body. And by this time, of course, it had gotten... Because when I left to come to the hospital, I had no idea why I was even going over there. But by the time I speak of, it was on public radio and television, and crowds of people were gathering around the building. And in the vicinity of the loading dock adjacent to the autopsy room, there was beginning to arrive large numbers of people. And as I came out of the morgue in my scrub suit, and before the President's body arrived, there was a photographer, a press photographer, roaming around the cars, and I didn't want to get in a personal altercation with him. So I walked out onto the loading dock where there were quite an accumulation of people, and I said, who's in charge here? And I meant of the crowd control, as it were. And a gentleman standing no more than 3 yards from me informed me in a very loud voice that he was in charge. And I said, and who are you? And he said that he was the commanding general of the military district of Washington. I said, fine. There's a photographer in there. I don't think we'd like to have him present. And he dispatched, I think, a Marine captain to go and remove this person. That was, I had no further conversation with this gentleman, nor did he direct me as to what I should or shouldn't do.
Right. Well, in the course of the autopsy you did do, and this, I guess, has been a point that's been raised before, did you feel directly or indirectly that somebody else advised you as to what the extent of the autopsy should be, perhaps as far as leaving marks in the body or making incisions or following bullet holes?
Yes.
Or as Dr. Petty brought up in the beginning, perhaps, whether to look at the adrenal glands or not?
There was no question, but we were being urged to expedite this examination as quickly as possible, that the members of the President's family were in the building, that they had refused to leave the premises until the President's body was ready to be moved, and similar remarks of that vein, which we made every effort to put aside and approach this investigation in a scientific manner as we could. But did it harass us and cause difficulty? Of course it did. How could it not?
I don't think it interfered with the manner in which we did the autopsy.
I don't either.
Well, I ask you this question in the sense that all of us here have been in similar positions of a lesser magnitude when, for one reason or another, they don't want an autopsy, they don't want a full autopsy, whatever. So we appreciate the concern.
It was stressed that the main purpose of the examination, and of course the main purpose that we understood the examination, what happened to the President? What killed the President of the United States? And
which you feel that you established. Now, for example, not exploring the wound from the back to the neck, that was not done, cutting it open completely. That wasn't done specifically because somebody said, don't do it.
Oh, wait a minute. That wound was excised.
The back wound. I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. The back of the neck.
And there were slides.
And there are microslides of that wound.
I see. The skin was taken out. And then was it...
it was probed.
Probed? Was it opened up?
It was not laid open.
No. That was your decision as opposed to somebody else's decision?
I guess it was mine. Yeah, it was my decision.
Given everything going on at the time.
Yeah, our collective decision, I suppose.
We had exhibited the mid portion of the tract in the chest by that time and demonstrated the contusion on the apex of the lung subplurally. And we had
pretty good course.
At that point, 2 points of the wound. And then subsequently the wound exit.
The track definitely did not go through the pulmonary tissue.
Negative.
No.
No, there was a contusion. Yeah, there was a contusion of the dome of the right side of the thorax, and a contusion of, as Dr. Boswell says, a retropleural contusion, and there was a contusion of the upper lobe of the lung.
Now, the retroparietal pleura.
Retroparietal pleura.
Now, you bring up another issue that you can be of great help to us, because you saw the microscopic slides. We apparently, it appears, will not be able to see the microscopic slides, certainly at this time, because they're not available to us now. Is there anything you can tell us about the microscopic evaluation or examination?
I don't think anything that would materially change anybody's opinion. The wound was similar to other bullet wounds that I have seen in the skin. It's sort of a charring effect in the margins. Nothing particularly remarkable.
No particular matter.
Yeah, was there any...
I don't remember whether there was foreign material or... I don't remember.
Would looking at your microscopic description refresh your memory?
Sure.
Do we have it? I think Dr. Petty has one.
Could we perhaps take 5 minutes and change the tape and the doctors can look at the descriptions for that?
That would be a good point.
I don't have it.
We have a microscopic description someplace.
With starting the record again at this point with the new tape, Dr. Humes was, and Dr. Boswell about to refer to the microscopic findings that they noted.
Yeah, we were asked specifically about the skin wounds, and was there any foreign particulate material in either of the skin wounds, and we refreshed our mind by looking at the brief microscopic report we made, and described in that sections of both the occipital and the upper right thoracic wounds were examined. They were essentially similar, and the only foreign material described were several bone fragments at the margins of the wound in the scalp. So we did not describe foreign particulate material, and I therefore presume was not present.
Well, did you have any questions, parents? John? Is there anything that perhaps that we haven't covered that you think might be of pertinence to the group?
No, I'm distressed with the confusion and allegations of seeming complicity in some plot that we may have been engaged in, which of course is totally ridiculous. We operated under great difficulty. We operated under difficulty in testifying before the Warren Commission because at that juncture we had not the photographs or the X-rays available to us. We worked with an artist, a young medical illustrator who worked for us at the Naval Medical School, and he made a couple of schematic diagrams which have been widely publicized that came reasonably close to describing what was our interpretation of the path of the missiles that struck the President. If you want to try and dissect those in great detail, you'd have to recall that we were doing it from memory, and he was doing it third hand at very best, and he was quite a young person and quite capable, I think, for his years and his experience. He did a pretty good job. Our interview with the Warren Commission, however, I think it's detailed, I'm sure, in the volumes. It was reasonably exhaustive, and we had no difficulty in the questions that were asked, and really have not had any official contact with anybody else officially reviewing this material in intervening years. And the point that I think from our point of view, and that of any pathologist who's saddled with this kind of a responsibility, the peripheral things as to whence cometh the missile and where it went and various other things, and
the so-called single bullet theory has been in part attributed to us. So that's not of our doing. Our description are of the anatomic abnormalities that we found, and did not seem inconsistent to us that this bullet exited the anterior neck of the president. It had to go somewhere. And the person who was sitting in front of him was the former governor. If it didn't hit him, I, for the world, have no idea where it went. Those kind of things, but they're peripheral kind of. But we've been sort of involved, or our names have been involved with those kinds of conjectures that we really can't make any big opinion about, or scientific opinion.
But in essence, you said, as you indicated before, your main goal at the time you did it, you indicated, was to determine what happened to the president.
Exactly.
And the bottom line for you then, as is it the same now, having reviewed everything, discussed everything, essentially 2 gunshot wounds from behind struck the president.
Correct.
Now, there may be, as we're going over the photos and x-rays and all, some room for discussion about precise points, but the essential finding, the 2 gunshot wounds from behind and from above, I take it, or from behind.
I think behind is probably most one can say from the anatomic findings.
And apart from the tremendous pressures of various non-specific pressures to get the things done rapidly, and you didn't feel any specific, and knowing what the requests of the families are in a situation like this, to be as quick and brief as possible, you didn't have any specific constraint on you by an individual as to what you should or shouldn't do as far as the autopsy goes.
But not as it pertains to the injuries to the president.
Well, as pertains to the whole autopsy. And this is something that I don't want to press you on, but just one of the things of concern in reviewing the autopsy protocol is that many organs, it's not only adrenal glands, but there's many other organs you don't specifically describe. Was that of your own judgment and temperament and emotion, or more specifically, possibly from another source? And this is not meant to be, tricky or anything.
There were no constraints. Initially, Admiral Berkeley said that they had taught Boswell and that they needed the bullet to complete the case. And we were told initially that's what we should do, is to find the bullet. Following the x-rays, we realized that that was not possible, that there was no bullet there except fragments. And at that point, Jim and Admiral Berkeley discussed it, and it was at that point that he agreed that we should continue and do a complete autopsy, which we then did.
Right.
And that was the only constraint during the course of the autopsy, and that was immaterial as it turned out.
Because what I'm saying is, I think it would be derelict not to afford you an opportunity or ask you these questions.
No, it would be
discussion you're having among
right.
peers.
It would be a mistake. It would be a mistake, and for anybody to interpret that any of this confusion under which we operated significantly interfered with our ability to make this examination, to take these photographs, to do the x-rays, and so forth. No. To the gigantic retrospective, so would one do everything exactly today as one did that evening? That's another question.
But you did, at some point, consult with Admiral Berkeley as to how far to go.
Well, early on, his desire was, he was a physician, he was a family physician, he was a family physician to the president's family. His concerns were, I think, very understandable in light of the emotional attitude of the family. He was in hopes that the examination could achieve its goal in as expedient a manner as possible. I think that reasonably accurately describes what he was doing.
Does anybody have any other questions? I think we ought to, for the record, poll everyone. Would you mind doing that?
Yeah, I think we have, as we go around, this is the only opportunity Dr. Boswell and Dr. Newman had to discuss this further, to make sure that there aren't things anybody has in their mind to request or discuss in fairness to everybody concerned that haven't been discussed. But we'd like to clear. Dr. Earl Rose.
Earl Rose, no questions. Thank you very much.
John Coe.
No further questions. I also wish to thank both Dr. Boswell and Dr. Hughes for being before us.
Dr. George Malcolm.
No questions, except my sincere thanks to these two gentlemen.
Dr. Davis.
No questions, but I again would like to thank them very much because I think that this has helped us and probably helped set the record straight and clarify issues that have been raised.
I would, at this juncture, if I might interject, one thing. It was reasonably easy to demonstrate, certainly verbally, if we didn't succeed in the photographs, the wound of entrance in the posterior portion of the skull. It was not so easy to accurately locate the wound of exit because of the great disruption of the fragment and the loss of tissue and bone in that area. So that if we placed it if we seemed to place it a little behind or a little below or a little wherever, in relation to what now we collectively may decide after looking at in a dispassionate, quiet manner with x-rays and photographs and things that are available, I'm not a bit surprised because the x-ray number 1 and 2 show you the massive defect and kind of hard to pinpoint it in that massive defect. And these flaps were not firmly attached. They were bony fragments were floating around in the loose scalp.
Dr. Petty.
I have no further questions, but I think that we would have been remiss if we had not invited you to come down and give us a hand in trying to interpret the photographs. I think that any inquiry into photography, x-rays, and so forth ought to be accompanied with a on-the-level discussion between the people that were involved at the time and the people that are reviewing. And I think this is just great to be able to establish some form of rapport, which has been denied you, I might add, for some little time.
Well, I would again comment for the record that we have acceded to any reasonable request from any responsible persons in this regard and have shunned any other types of discussions about this case. Well, I've had discussions. I've gotten to know John Latimer for other reasons. I know some of the things he's done, and he and I have had conversations. And he's come and lectured and given a talk at our hospital, things like that nature. But as far as engaging in any, as you very well know, Dr. Petty, nor do we plan any such discussions we feel are inappropriate.
Given this opportunity for all of us, is there any further thing, Dr. Yoon or Dr. Boswell, that you would perhaps want to get into the record or that could be of assistance that we left out? When 6 years from now we say, well, why didn't we discuss this or that? I think to let the record be clear that you've been under our questioning now for 2 hours and 20 minutes.
We're in no hurry, as I told Dr. Petty earlier. Anything that would come up in the future after we leave that we can be helpful with, I would hope that you would provide us the opportunity to be of assistance.
Dr. Boswell, anything? One minor thing. And looking at the x-rays, there seemed 3 of them that were taken after the body was eviscerated. Do you recall during the autopsy, you took most of the x-rays prior to the autopsy?
Oh, I can clarify that because having not found a missile or of any substance, and having had experiences in other locations as anybody has, that bullets can do very strange things, we decided that we should take a total x-ray of this gentleman so that some bullet didn't travel down an extremity or go some other place. And it was at that juncture that we made that decision because we all had that disturbing experience to have a missile do some very strange things. So we probably had eviscerated the body when we took extremities, for instance.
Additional x-rays.
Yeah, whatever.
I also want to thank you both tremendously for being such not only help, but of instant help on such short notice.
And finally, on behalf of the staff,